Hello and welcome back to my RC channel. I'm AndyRC and today I'm going to be taking a look at the all-new EMAX TinyHawk S. So when anybody asks me what's the best beginner model to start out with, I usually recommend the EMAX TinyHawk because you can practice flying it indoors as well as flying it outdoors on a calm day. And I gave my friend Phil the RTF version, and up till now he's only been flying planes, and the TinyHawk got him instantly hooked, and I'll link to that video in the below. I still need to do a review of the RTF version, but considering that I'm already recommending it, you kind of get the gist. So I guess you could say that this is a more advanced version with some upgrades off the back of the feedback from the first one. The big one being that it accepts and comes with a 2S Lipo. This one is a 300 mAh 35C non-high volt with a PH2 connector rather than an XT30 connector. Now for 2S whoops, XT30 connectors seem to be the trend, but there have been some issues recently in doing this. For example, with the Crazy Bee boards, they are now recommending that you add a capacitor because the voltage spike from plugging in an XT30 has been blowing components on the board. Now, there's no doubt that on 2S an XT30 connector has been proved to have less voltage sag, while at the same time providing more power and not puffing and ruining lipos. And looking at the specs, I can't see a reason why you couldn't add an XT30 to this model. However, at the same time, it comes with the usual 450 mAh 1S lipo, so it can fly on both 1 and 2S. You are also given a 1S and a 2S USB charger, where it has a balance port for the 2S lipo and a switch to either charge it at a high volt or the usual 4.2 volts per cell. Now I'm told that the 2S Lipo will charge to a high volt, however this is the case with all Lipos, it just reduces their life cycle, so I'll probably be flying it on a 2S charged as a non-high volt. And going back to the PH2 connector, they are rated for 2 amps, but in reality can do around about 10 amps, which is why I think they have provided a low C-rated 2S Lipo for this model, because 300 milliamp times by 35C is around about 10 amps, so we may actually see some voltage sag with this 2S Lipo, and the provided 2S Lipo is only 5 grams lighter than a GMB 300 milliamp high volt, so again that might be an avenue to explore later. However, with the 1S TinyHawk, they used a high capacity LiPo for a 1-cell machine. And this, for me, is what made it one of the most successful 1S brushless models, because its LiPo voltage stayed above 3 volts and none of my TinyHawk Lipos have puffed, whereas the 250 milliamp 1S models that are around about the 65mm size would get like 6 cycles before the lipo looked like a balloon. So I think EMAX got it right with the 1S. So I hope we don't get too much voltage sag on this 2S lipo, because it would be awesome to be able to fly both 1S and 2S at the same time. But if it starts to ruin batteries, then it might be worth seeing what happens adding an XT30. But if that is the case, then it'll be another video. So this is the bind and fly, and just like the first one, it comes in a robust EMAX pouch. At first glance the frame looks the same as the first version, but it is quite a bit different. So first of all, this is the black version, which is going to be its initial colour, and I believe different colours will come later. You can swap out the frame from the V1, but the V1 is going to have this frame eventually anyways, and of course the V1 frame can only accommodate a 1S LiPo, whereas on this version we now have rubber bands underneath to accommodate both LiPo types. The struts have been beefed up on the protectors, and to be fair to the original, it did take a lot of crashes for them to start snapping, and even then some epoxy would usually sort that. And of course, spare frames are going to be available, so even if these break, then you can get a new frame. But you can see that the struts where they meet the protectors are actually a little bit wider compared to the original, and this gives some extra strength. A second lip has been put in place so that you can change the camera to a higher angle. Apparently this was a popular request, but for me the default angle is perfect. I guess some guys want more angle to go faster, especially now that it supports 2S. The camera is still tension fitted though, so I'd recommend taking it apart if you want to change the camera angle. EMAX have also advised that you might want to add a little bit of glue to the camera once you had found your desired camera angle, because just like the first version, the camera is prone to popping out under a heavy crash. So to accommodate the two LiPo types, the spec of the motors have been slightly changed. The V1 are a 08025 15,000 kV brushless motor, but on this new one they are a 0802 15,500 kV motor. So the stator height is just fractionally lower, but with the higher kV, the 1S performance should still be good, if not the same as the V1, and I think that's what they were going for with this model, is for it to be as good as the V1, but then if you want to go to S, you'll actually get more power rather than an equivalency. And I've been told that the flight time should be longer on 1S than the original, but I'll have to check out the power difference, of course, comparing the V1 against the TinyHawk S. And then on 2S, well, I haven't flown it yet, but we are essentially doubling the RPM, albeit without any load, because kV is measured without load, but it should be pretty interesting to see the results. So in order to accept 2S, the motors have had to be tweaked to cope with the voltage. They have also changed the props to a 4-blade from the 3-blade. This has been done due to the complaint that the V1 wouldn't do turtle mode, so the 4-blade prop gives a little bit more thrust to flip it over and right itself. However, in a straight line, the 3-blade props are 3 to 5 mph faster, but in a race type situation, the more punchy 4-bladed props should give better acceleration, and you probably won't notice the speed difference. If you aren't bothered about turtle mode working and prefer the feel of the 3-bladed props, then they do fit the new model. But I've been using these 4-bladed props on my V1 for some time now, and I really like them. They are also providing a spare set of these propellers, which I don't think they did with the first Bynum Fly that came out. The ESCs have been updated to accept the 2S voltage, and you can see that the JST connectors from the motors now plug into the side of the board rather than the top. This does make them more difficult to access. However, I found that in heavy crashes the connectors would sometimes pop out, and that's not why they've actually been moved to the sides though. It's actually to allow more space for the updated 2S FETs on the ESCs. So just like the first version, the ESCs and flight controller are an all-in-one, but the ESCs have been uprated from 3 amp to a 5 amp continuous with a 6 amp burst, which doesn't sound like a lot, but that's per ESC, so 5 amp continuous would be 20 amps in total, and then the 6 amp burst would be 24 amp, which is the same rating as the Crazy Bee F3 boards. So again, an XT30 could be possible, but it's not confirmed yet. And it's also worth noting that I've seen these GMB LiPos push 24 amps, so it could be on the edge with an XT30 and this LiPo. And I've seen a lot of people complaining about the Crazy Bee boards going up in flames with an XT30 connector. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm not going to be doing it in this video. We'll see how it flies stock first. Another big change with this guy is the receiver. So it's an SPI based receiver now, so it can do FrSky D16 telemetry. However, it comes flashed with Betaflight version 4, and there have been reports that the range isn't so good when using D16 telemetry, and you can get random dropouts. So I think I'm going to be sticking with D8 mode, which will still feed the RSSI through an aux channel. Now, I'm not a big telemetry user, but if you want that, then this new board supports it. Now, for the moment, it's just going to be available as an FrSky model, but I fed back to EMAX that I think it will be in their interest to have a FlySky and DSMX SPI version, just like the Crazy Bee boards do with their SPI receiver. However, there is a spare uninverted UART free, so you can use any receiver you like. And if you are using the SPI based receiver, then of course the binding is easier, so you power up the model first and then hold down the bind button for a couple of seconds, which is located in the same place underneath as the first model, and the bootloader button is in the same place as well on the other side. The flight controller is also soft mounted with grommets, the same as the first version. One thing that I'm seeing is the receiver's antenna coming out from the underneath of the canopy. I think I would change this so that it comes out of the gap at the top of the canopy. I did this with my V1 along with the VTX antenna, and it seemed to give better range while also keeping them out of the way of the props. We'll take a look at the Betaflight settings later, but the USB connection and VTX control button is in the same place. My only gripe with the USB placement is that the SpeedyBee Bluetooth connector won't fit because of the side cowling, but most of the on-the-go cables fit, so that's me just being really picky. And in general, the USB connector being accessible from the top is much better than the ones that are placed underneath, where you usually have to remove the LiPo out of the way to get to it. Now, the VTX has smart audio, so there's not much need for the button. However, the VTX comes locked out of the box, so to unlock it, you have to hold down this button while powering the model on, and when it's unlocked, all of the lights should go off on the VTX. And then to relock the VTX, it's the same procedure, but the LED will stay solid. So the VTX hasn't changed at all since the first version, so it's exactly the same, outputting 25 milliwatts. So you might be thinking, why does it have a lock and unlock function? Well, it's to cover themselves, so it locks out some of the channels that can't be used in certain areas of the world. And you need to be really careful with this, because out of the box it comes locked. And if you use the smart audio to change a channel that is locked out, it will actually let you do it, but then it won't transmit anything. I learned this the hard way, and of course you can then use the button to change to an unlocked channel, but it's something to look out for, because I thought my VTX had blown because it was producing heat, but I couldn't get a channel or picture or anything, so look out for that. I also fed back to EMAX that with certain goggles and modules, for some reason, the VTX records a load of breakup on some DVRs, which is really strange because you never get it through the goggles. It's just the DVR, and they are investigating that. What's even weirder is that it seems to be much worse indoors than outdoors, and in bigger indoor spaces rather than smaller indoor spaces. So they are looking into that, but it doesn't seem to happen with some goggles or some modules. Specifically with rapid fire, it seems to be okay, but it is something that they are looking into. And it's not going to bother a lot of people. It only really bothers me because I have to show you guys the DVR to give a representation of what it looks like through the goggles, but of course in certain situations I'm getting a lot of breakup in the DVR. And then lastly we have the camera, which is the same as the V1, but they have changed the lens so that the image is less distorted. Now, I never had a problem with the original lens, so I'll have to see if I can notice any difference. Other than that, in the pouch we have got the spare set of props, which I already mentioned. Then we have a bag of spare parts with 2 spare rubber bands to hold the Lipo in, as well as some spare screws and 2 spare soft mounts for the flight controller. And we've got a PH2 connector, I guess, in case the one that is fitted to the model gets mangled up in the props in a crash. And we have got a mini screwdriver as well. We've got some EMAX stickers and the 2 lipos, as well as the USB charger. Then we have got a manual, but this is interesting. We've also got a warning card to tell me to switch to PID profile 2 and rate profile 2 when using 2S. It also mentions that the PID and rate profile 1 is for 1S, and it's stuff like this that separates EMAX from the rest. Every model supports different LiPo voltages and should have an effect on the PIDs, because the model is going to react differently to the extra power, but also the extra weight gain. So on the subject of weight, without a LiPo, the TinyHawk S weighs 28.3 grams, which is actually 0.3 of a gram lighter than the original, which is 28.6 grams. That could be down to the SPI receiver, I would think. Then with the 1S LiPo added, it weighs 41.3 grams, and with the provided 2S LiPo, it weighs 43.4 grams. So here we are in the Betaflight configurator, and it's the latest version, 10.51. The reason I mention that is that this model's flight controller has got an official version of Betaflight 4 flash to it. So the recent EMAX Buzz Freestyle 5-inch model that came out had a release candidate of Betaflight 4. And when they released this 10.51 configurator, some of the tabs didn't work correctly. But with this one, it is the official release of Betaflight 4, so we can use the latest configurator. So I've got the TinyHawk S plugged into the computer via a USB connector, and you can see COM16 has come up there, so I can connect to it. Now, this is something that I think is going to be a little bit tricky for EMAX. You see, EMAX are known for giving their models to pilots, and they fly them and set them up for you so that you don't have to. The problem is Betaflight is changing a lot. In fact, from Betaflight version 4 to version 4.02 or now 4.03, I hear that the settings are completely different. So I think EMAX is going to struggle here. Either when they update Betaflight and do some serious changes, they're going to have to give you a new CLI. They have definitely done that with the Buzz, and I'll be making another video on that because, spoiler alert, I've got the 6S version. I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, you're really going to want to stick with the version of Betaflight that it comes with, because the idea is that it's going to be set up pretty nice unless they come out with a different CLI. In that case, I would just keep an eye on the EMAX website under the particular product and the download section. Anyways, let's go into the ports. And we don't have anything selected for the Serial RX because it's an SPI based receiver, but we do have the VTX here on the UART2 and it's TBS Smart Audio. You can see we've got the UART1 spare, as I showed earlier, so if you want to use another separate receiver to get maybe more range or for whatever reason, then we do have this spare UART here. So let's check out the configuration tab. So we've got D-Shot 600 and we've got a motor idle speed of 3%. Now I would say that that was a little bit low. low. Now I know they've done some changes in Betaflight 4, so maybe that's why it's low, but I think I would at least, I'm gonna try 5 and see what happens. You're not supposed to change any of these settings, but you know, I'm just gonna try it because 3 can cause flips of death in previous versions of Betaflight. So if you have got, like, say, a high rate, then it can cause a motor to have to stop if this value is too low, and then the model's flight controller can't react quick enough, or the motor can't restart, and it goes into a flip or a death roll. So I'm going to keep that at 5, but maybe 3 is okay. I don't know. So let's come down here. So we've got the maximum arm angle at 50. So this is a safety feature. If you have got your Lipo plugged in and you accidentally arm your model and the angle of the copter is more than 50 degrees, then it won't arm. But this is a tiny whoop and I can't see it really doing much damage. It might nip you a little bit on 2S, but I usually risk it and put it to 180, because that means if you get stuck in a tree or if you want to take off on a bank, then it will let you arm. And if you get stuck in a tree, you can sometimes waggle out of it, or if the D-shot commands aren't loud enough, you can temporarily arm the model and that will make a noise and you can actually find a model. So I tend to go with 180. That means that the model will arm no matter what angle the copter is at. But if you are carrying it and accidentally arm it, then you know you could get a finger in the prop. So I need to save that. But first we'll check out everything else. So we've got 8K on the PID loop and gyro update frequency. We've got accelerometer enabled. We've got TinyHawk S as the craft name. And then down here for the receiver, we've got SPI RX support. And it's actually set up as FrSky D out of the box. So that is sort of them confirming that, yeah, the D16 mode with telemetry kind of has some issues with dropouts. So yeah, X is D16, just to confuse you, and then D is D8 mode. And actually they have got the telemetry turned off, although I'm not sure if that actually makes a difference because it does it through SPI. But anyways, it's selected as D8 mode out of the box and not D16. I'm going to leave it as that because I don't want to run into any issues. So further down, we've got air mode and on-screen display turned on, and we've got anti-gravity and dynamic filter. We've got RX set, so that is for a lost model alarm, but I like to have RX lost as well, just in case. So if you get a failsafe or lose a bind or whatever reason, then it will also beep at the same time. So I like to turn that on. So just a couple of changes there, but nothing too drastic. So yeah, fairly impressive there. I'm going to save and reboot, although Betaflight can be quite temperamental and it has not rebooted, so I'm going to reconnect. So power and battery, we've got the minimum cell voltage set at 2.9 and then the warning cell voltage at 3.2. That's probably about correct, I would say, for 1S. Usually on the smaller models, I would say no, go like really low to like 2.9 or whatever, but on 1S I know that it is safe to have these figures because it doesn't really drop below these figures and you want to be landing anyways. Now it might be completely different on 2S. If we get loads of voltage sag, then when we go up on the throttle, this warning voltage here we may get on our on-screen display just from doing a punch out. But I think I'm gonna leave it, you know, and see what happens. We've got 4.5 there for the maximum cell voltage. Should be okay, I think, for a high volt, so I'm gonna leave it there. I usually go 4.6 just to be safe, but I'm gonna just leave everything there. We don't have a current meter with this model, and I'm gonna leave the scaling there. So on to PID tuning. So this is where we've got the different profiles. These PIDs are really high, aren't they? So let's just check out here. So we have got profile 1, so that is for the PIDs, and this is for 1S. Just look at those P gains, 100 there, and we don't have any D min, so it's not like it's doing dynamic PID changes, so those are genuinely quite high. Same for the D, but well, this is EMAX, so we're gonna trust them. And then what's profile 2? So yeah, a little bit lower for 2S, but still quite high in general. And again, we don't have any D min. So if you're not aware, on Betaflight 4, we have this dynamic D term, so that we can set sort of like a minimum range. So when the model is flying, you know, fairly steadily, then we can reduce the D dynamically. It does it itself, but that's all set to 0, so it's always going to be that. Then we've got the different rate profiles. So that is actually a very conservative rate for the 1S, and then is that a little bit higher for 2S? Yeah, maybe they are saying the 1S indoors you're going to want to be smooth, but I'm going to be changing both of these, I think, because that is going to be really docile for me. Although we've got quite a lot of RC Expo in there, but I'm going to boost that up. I know that I probably shouldn't, but I usually like around about 900 these days. I used to go to 1,000, so that's like 1,000 degrees a second, but these days I like to be a little bit more smoother because I find that I'm quite a little bit twitchy on 1,000, so I just go under that. So that's for rate profile 1. Do I have to press save when I change that? Yeah, and then I'm going to do the same for 2 as well. We don't have any RC Expo there, so yeah, I mean, you know, you could try it, but, you know, I prefer around about 900 these days. It changes all the time as my flying evolves, and I like to stick these up to about 16. Maybe I should experiment more, but yeah, like to have them at around about that. So let's save that. Right, so is there anything else that we need to look at? So TPA 0.5 there, so yeah, quite a high TPA. We've got I-term rotation turned on, but not VBAT PID compensation or smart feed forward. And then we've got I-term relax set to gyro, anti-gravity mode set to 5, and smooth. I think those are defaults actually. Do any of those change when you go to the profile? Yeah, they do. Look at that. So profile 1 has turned off I-term rotation. So yeah, I mean, you know, they make these models for beginners, so you don't have to make all of these changes. So I'm just having a look here. Yeah, not much difference there. And they say, you know, oh, don't change any of the settings, but I just can't help myself. Look at that. So on the 1S setting, the TPA is just 0.1, and then on profile 2, is it profile 2 or is it the rate profile? Yeah, so you have to match them there, and then that goes to 0.5. So yeah, make sure that you have got the right profile selected, and you can do this through the on-screen display. Now I'm not going to touch the PIDs, but I messed around with the rates. And has anything changed here with the angle limit as well? Oh yeah, if I remember right, can you see here, angle limit 25. Now again, this is just a personal thing, but I found that 25 is a little bit too docile for me, so I flip it up to 50. So let's save that. And does that come under the PID? Yes, it does. So on profile 2 as well, what happens if we select that? Yeah, it stays at 25. So that's for angle mode, and 25 is going to be really docile, and on a windy day it could get away from you, so I would recommend going to 50 on that there. But anyways, let's leave that there. So TAER1234, that's right, for my Tyrannus RSSI channel. You do want to have it disabled because the RSSI feeds through from the SPI receiver to the on-screen display automatically. So if you actually select an aux channel, then your RSSI won't work. It seems counterintuitive. That's interesting. The stick high threshold at 2000 as well usually doesn't make a difference. Again, oh, I shouldn't be doing these changes, but I'm going to stick in some deadband there and save that as well. So we've got some RC smoothing in there as well, and it looks like all of the channels have been smoothed. So that's the settings there. Actually, I didn't check out the filter settings, did I? I don't usually mess around with these, but do those change when you go to the different profiles? Don't think so. So receiver, yeah, I think I covered everything there. Modes, I'm gonna need to change this just because the way that I have it set up. So I have my angle in the low position, and I usually don't run horizon mode, but well, I'll leave it in there, why not? And yeah, aux 2, I usually have that. And then we've got beeper on aux 3, I usually have that there, and then flip over after crash on the aux 4. So yeah, we can actually do that because we're not relying on a aux channel for the RSSI. So yeah, I can set up an aux 4 and that should work. So I will save that. And then let's go into the on-screen display, see what we've got here. So very minimalistic. I'm glad to see that we have got the VTX channel and also the voltage and the fly min rather than the on time, and we've got the craft name. Don't have the RSSI value though. Strange that they haven't put that on there, and just selecting it, it's hid it somewhere, so must put it under here somewhere. There we go. So I'm just going to stick that at the top somewhere and try and remember where this went. I think it was around about there. So it's an NTSC camera. I think that's the only thing that I would change on there. We don't need the max speed because we don't have a GPS, timer to min battery, battery voltage. Yep, so that's the only thing I would change there. Of course, make sure that your failsafe works. So, you know, if you want to mess around with the failsafe, you can go into expert mode. But all you really need to do is take the props off, make sure that your transmitter is set up for no pulses. You don't really need to touch anything in the failsafe. And then finally, let's check out the CLI. I'll just type in version so we can see the full target. So it's Maytech F411RX, and it's Betaflight for April 11th 2019. So yeah, sorry if that was a little bit convoluted, but this is the first time that I've seen Betaflight, and that is the setup that I would do for this model. So this product that I have received, EMAX are calling batch 1, and I've actually found a couple of anomalies in the instruction manual, so I thought I would let you know about them if you are an early adopter of this guy. So the first one is regarding the Lipo. I mentioned earlier that it's a non-high volt, but EMAX have advised that you can charge it to a high volt, and that is the case with all Lipos. They are just overcharged normal Lipos. However, its nominal voltage is 7.4 volts, which is correct for a Lipo that you would charge to 4.2 volts per cell. However, in the manual it is definitely listed as a 300 milliamp high volt Lipo. So either it's been labeled wrong or it's a non-high volt Lipo. Either way, I would recommend charging it not at a high volt, because with this PH2 connector I think that it is going to have quite a bit of voltage sag, and that will destroy the internal chemistry of the Lipo, so charging it to a high volt will just amplify that. The second thing that I noticed, and this was from running through Betaflight, was the different rate profiles. They don't match what the instructions say. So it says that there are actually 3 different rate profiles. So it says profile 1 is designed for optimal indoor flight control with the EMAX 1S HV 450 milliamp battery. And then it says profile 2 is similar to profile 1 but with a different throttle curve for the use with a 2S battery. And I didn't find that the case in Betaflight. It was the other way around. It was profile 1 that actually had got the throttle curve, so I've let them know about that. And then profile 3 is actually just stock Betaflight rates. So it says here it's more for the pincher pilot, but actually they are just stock Betaflight rates. So I thought that was worth mentioning if you are an early adopter of this guy. I'm sure they will update the manual or update the CLI of the model. So the first flight that I did was actually an FPV flight on 1S indoors, and straight away I could just tell how smooth the controls were, and I could get through all of the gaps that a 65mm model could get through. And I've just kind of cut some scenes together because I put around about 10 batteries through this evening because I had the house to myself and I was having a whale of a time. Look at that tiny gap that I could just get through, and I always like to do a mirror shot. Now I'm flying pretty slow around the house. I know some people like to fly fast, and that's fair enough, but I prefer to fly slower and get through tighter gaps, so that's what I like to do. So we've got the music room here where we have got endless gaps, and I've set up a little course so that I can fly through particular gaps. We've got another big mirror there, just about see ourselves. I always think that is a strange shot when you are looking through the goggles. So I'm going to very slowly attempt to go through the arms on this chair, and we are talking centimeters either side of the frame, which is why I'm going so slow. And then again between the hi-hat of the drums, and then getting down really low, and it's really close here. I was nearly clipping that stool for the keyboard, and again going through the hi-hat. But this is the most fun for me with Tiny Whoops. I absolutely love it. So now I think I go behind the chair, and I think I've set up some air dusters to fly through with a straw going along the top, and I just about make that. And again, just flying through cymbals and hi-hats and things, and getting another selfie shot in the mirror. This thing is really fun. Now, I actually tried some low light, so there's no light in this particular area by the pantry, and the camera performed pretty well. I couldn't really notice the different lens. Now, maybe some of you avid TinyHawk flyers will notice it, but I couldn't notice it. And I'm not getting too much breakup either with the DVR footage. Wasn't getting any through the goggles. Look at that flight time, 4 minutes 35. In fact, I think I nearly got to 5-minute flight time, and the voltage started to really drop here and it caught me out. So there you go, needing to land there. But as for range, I could get all around the house. The range is good for about 100 meters. So when I fly it on 2S, you will see the RSSI go down to about 30, and that's at about 100 meters, which is respectable for a model of this size. Okay, let's get the original to set the benchmark. So this is on its 1S original Lipo, and it's charged to a high volt. And to make it fair, I have fitted the 4-bladed props that the TinyHawk S has. So let's see what the punch is like. Plenty of power, but let's see how the new model flies on a 1S. Okay, so directly after flying the first version, let's see what the punch is like on the TinyHawk S. I think it's a little bit more, you know. It's very marginal, but I could feel it straight away, the higher RPMs. Yeah. So even on 1S, slightly more power with the new TinyHawk S. So taking it into acro now. Everything seems fine. Unfortunately, it's a pretty windy day here today, so not perfect conditions for 1S, but it's coping. Bags of power there. Really happy with that. Loads of power to recover. No drift in angle mode, just rock steady. So let's now see what 2S does. So the moment of truth on a 2S Lipo, and it's in the air straight away. So I'm having to be a little bit more careful on the throttle. It's hovering at just, wow, like 10%. So let's go for a punch. Oh yeah. And that's getting away from me fast, so I'm gonna go straight into acro mode. There is no doubt that there is plenty more power on 2S with this guy. That is something I'm not used to. And actually on 1S, the digital idle was fine at 5%, but I actually think on 2S 5% might be a little bit high, and perhaps that's why they reduced it to 3%, because as soon as I armed it, it kind of leaped into the air with just a couple of percent on the throttle. But wow, yeah, that's a huge difference. But seems to be flying fine. Now, it's difficult to hear oscillations or anything like that on models this small, but it is possible. Seems to be flying smooth, and it's pretty light on this Lipo as well. and that's important for these guys when doing acro and things like that. So hopefully the lighter battery will mean that we can do acro nicely. But yeah, that is a big difference in power for sure. I think you guys who are fans of the first one are absolutely gonna love this thing, and I'm a big fan of the first one. I think the first one is great for indoors and great for beginners, but it does sometimes lack the power on 1S to recover from maneuvers, but that is not going to be a problem with this. Sometimes on 1S you could be flying it around and do a roll, and you could put full throttle in, and sometimes it wouldn't be enough to recover and it would hit the ground. Not on 2S. This should be pretty exciting for FPV. So let's give that a try. So let's take a look at some DVR footage on 2S, and it's a really dreary day. We are having a true English summer. We've been really lucky the last couple of years, but I'm flying between rain clouds here and it's really windy at the same time. Now let's see what the voltage does when I go up on the throttle over the tree. Look at that, it is flashing. So that is confirming to me what I was a little bit worried about earlier with the PH2 connector and 2S. So we're getting voltage sag when I go up on the throttle above the point of where we should be landing. So 4 volts reading there. So I think people who are going to get this will probably explore adding an XT30, because that is how you get rid of that. Now I'm still getting loads of power, but the disadvantage of the PH2 connector and 2S and having that voltage sag is that it's gonna destroy the chemistry of the Lipo, and the Lipo will puff. So I wonder whether you can put an XT30 on there as well as a PH2, so you can fly at 1S and 2S. That would put the weight up, but I think it would be worth investigating. Now it was flying really nicely despite the wind, and I couldn't trick it out at all until it got towards the end of the battery. And even then, I think it was a gust of wind that actually caught it. So I did like an inverted yaw spin. You can do that kind of maneuver with this kind of power. So there we go, we've got an inverted yaw spin there. A little bit of breakup. And I am actually seeing a better picture through the goggles again, but outdoors it doesn't seem to do that flashy thing that it does so much indoors. It still does it a little bit, and you'll also see some lines across the video. It might not show up on YouTube. That's my True D diversity module. It is completely spent, and it's just my luck. I ordered a rapid fire, and there's a problem with rapid fire. I absolutely love rapid fire and it's a game changer, but my button was off center for some reason. Even they don't know why, but anyways, yes, so I'm struggling here with the True D. You can see the voltage there and the flight time as well. That's where we got the big wobble, but look at the voltage there, 6 volts, 5 volts, so we are at the end of the flight. So there you go, that is my review of the EMAX TinyHawk S. I absolutely love it. I'll put links in the description if you wish to get one. And as always, thanks so much for watching. Please continue to subscribe. Cheers.